non-spoiler review for Spider-Man Brand New Day. Not spoiling anything. I love this movie. There were a few things about it, like a couple things about it that I really didn't like, but all in all, guys, there's not a lot of negative to speak of when it comes to this movie. It's a great film, right? It's fantastic. I think one of the biggest questions people are going to have here is, how does this movie compare to Spider-Man No Way Home? Right? Is it better? Is it worse? You know, what's the whole deal? Honestly, I would say it's as good, if not better, depending on what kind of movie you're looking for, because this movie feels like the logical progression of Spider-Man No Way Home, right? Where No Way Home should have gone next. That's what this movie feels like, in the sense that No Way Home, you know, as we know, dealt with the death of Aunt May, and it dealt with the spell being cast that wiped, you know, all knowledge of Peter Parker's identity from like the world, right? So no one really remembers who he is or anything like that. And this movie dealt with the consequences of that. So what you saw in the trailer and the feeling you got from that, that's all still pretty much the same, in the sense that it is Peter Parker figuring out what his new normal is, while at the same time looking at where his life is at and then imagining where his life could have been. Of course, there's a lot of emphasis put on what his life could have looked like with Zendaya, with, Ned Leeds and so on. Right, there's a lot of things that go on there, but, you know, we'll kind of cross that bridge here in a second. I'll simply just say, if what you're doing is going into the movie expecting like some kind of a comparison to No Way Home, I wouldn't do that. Just look at it as like the next logical step to No Way Home. Having said that, no, I am not going to spoil the character of Sadie Sink, but I will say she's great in this movie. I loved her in this movie. She was fantastic throughout the entirety of the film, every scene she was in. But I will say one of the drawbacks, one of the things that I didn't like about the way that her character was handled, is that she felt very, very thin, very two-dimensional, until you get to the third act. Then there's all kinds of development with her character, and that's when she really gets cool, to the point that I'm almost kind of hesitant to say that the way they handled her character in the beginning was not as good as, you know, not as well as it could have been, because by the time you get to the third act, all that's kind of undone. It's just kind of like, okay, so there's a lot of depth to her, right? So I am excited to see, you know, what you guys think about her character, because I love the way that she was handled, you know, by the time you got to the third act. Just, I feel like getting there just made her feel very, very two-dimensional, right? And it just wasn't a whole lot going on there. Something else that I didn't like was Tillman, Metzger. And here's the reason why. Tillman's one of my favorite actors in Hollywood right now. I loved him in Severance. The reality here is that in the movie, there really wasn't any development for his character. He could have been anyone ever, right? I mean, he could have just played anybody. They could have just drawn a name out of the hat, you know, and that could have been it. But instead, they decided to go with Metzger. And I won't necessarily go in depth into him, right, in order to avoid spoilers, but I'll simply just say, I wish they had given more depth to him. And I wish they had given him like a kind of personal stake in all of it. That being said, I am excited to see where his character goes, because of the fact that he's simply just kind of here in order to provide a motivation for a lot of the things that go down. I can understand why they took the approach that he did, or I'm sorry, the approach that they did. But with him in the future of the MCU, I think he has the potential to become one of the most significant characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I'm hoping they take him in that direction, because Tillman's a phenomenal actor. That being said, I do have a couple of, I really have like one big concern here, right? Which is to say, the kind of character he plays is very reminiscent of the character he plays in Severance, right? Just like the shady office guy, right? Basically, you know, that whole kind of archetype. And because of how high profile this movie is going to be, there's the concern that he might get typecast, to be quite honest with you guys. Now, maybe it's a little too early to call that, but Severance was his breakout role, and that's kind of the type of role he's known for. This role feels very similar to that, right? So that being said, you know, let's talk about Tom Holland, and let's talk about Jon Bernthal, because I'll be honest with you guys, man, and I've seen this across the internet, and I'm kind of leaning towards it. I'm very much in this camp. Jon Bernthal and Tom Holland were amazing. The chemistry they had was fantastic. Oh my God, it was fantastic. To the point that, like, I would honestly go and I would pay good money to see a buddy cop film with Tom Holland and Jon Bernthal. I just call it like The Adventures of Pete and Frank, right? Like I would pay good money to see that movie. Or at the very least, if Disney Plus gave us like a 1 hour special, right? I think it'd be really, really cool. They had something just so great. But with Jon Bernthal in particular, because we'll talk more about Tom Holland here in a second, with Jon Bernthal in particular, here's what I felt, and I'm very curious to see if anybody else feels this way. I feel like the Punisher in the MCU is no longer a TV character anymore. I feel like this movie elevated him. Right up until this point, it's like, I mean, I could see him in a movie. I'd be kind of curious to see what he'd be like, you know, in a high profile film. After seeing him here, I don't think they can go back. Like, I don't think they can go back to putting Frank Castle in TV and for people to be satisfied with it. And honestly, I think we've passed that point a long time ago. I would say the same thing about Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio, Deborah Ann Wall, right? The guy that plays, God, I can never remember his name, right? The guy who plays Foggy. He was on Mighty Ducks back in the day. I can never remember his name. But that whole cast of Daredevil, I think that they have long since transitioned TV. And I kind of think they're in this position to where we should start seeing them more in movies, right? We already got Charlie Cox in No Way Home. So maybe that's just kind of like the little bit, right? You kind of get that little taste of what things could be like. And it's hard to go back, right? I think that's one of the big reasons why people have a difficult time swallowing the pill that is like Daredevil Born Again, because it's like, but put him in movies though. Like, I mean, he'd be great in movies, you know, that kind of thing. So, John Bernthal was great. He was fantastic. Everything I'd expect from the Punisher. The only thing I didn't like, right? John Bernthal, my guy, that haircut though. Like, I can't be the only one who was looking at that and being like, is this guy like a greaser from the 50s? Like, what is like a pompadour, right? Like, he looks like Vanilla Ice from Ninja Turtles 2. I was like, dude, this haircut, it ain't doing it. It ain't doing it, man. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm used to like, you know, I don't know. It just wasn't doing it for me. Nitpicking, right? 100%, right? It's just me being a petty little bitch, but still, I'm just saying, it wasn't really doing it for me, you know? So that being said, he was great throughout the movie. You know, kind of focusing on Tom Holland here. I loved Tom Holland in this movie. Jesus, I have never loved him more as Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe than I have in this film, because he perfectly encapsulates anybody out there who has ever experienced a personal loss, right? You know, for example, like I lost both my parents, right? Anybody who's lost like a parent, who's lost a friend, who's lost like a, you know, I don't know if I'd go as far as to say like a child, that's pretty extreme in a whole different league of its own, but anyone who's ever lost anything significant in that way, you understand the pain of what it means to experience that loss, but then you understand what it means to finally kind of start turning over, you know, turning that page to a degree, kind of like moving on with life and remembering that like the sun will rise and the day will go on, as hard as it may be. Tom Holland captures that perfectly in this movie. He nails it in this film. It's incredible because on one hand, he knows what his life could have looked like. He knows that he could be at MIT with his friends and they could be having a great time, you know, all that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, he knows that he made the right choice to keep them safe. But it's almost like there's a part of him that finds himself asking the question over the course of the movie, was it the right choice? He doesn't really vocalize that, but it's almost like he struggles with it. Like, was it really the right choice? Did I make the right call? Almost like he's trying to convince himself that it was the right call. But he handles it and especially his interactions with Sadie Sink. His interactions with Sadie Sink, especially when you get to the third act, right? Set up, conflict, resolution, the 3-act narrative in films. When you get to the third act and his whole interaction with Sadie Sink, that was great. But even in the moments up to that. And that's okay. We'll talk about that here. We'll talk about like my overall feeling of the film here in a second. But at this point, I want to talk about the person that honestly stole the show for me, right? Jacob Batalon, he was great, you know, as Ned Leeds. But honestly, man, the person who stole the show for me, Zendaya, right? And I know it sounds weird to say that, considering that it's like a Spider-Man film starring Tom Holland with everybody else doing stuff. But honestly, it was Zendaya, man, right? And here's the funny thing. I'm very hesitant to say that her quality as an actress in this film improved because of time spent with some of the top talent in Hollywood, working alongside some of the best film directors in the history of the industry, right? Christopher Nolan, Denis Villeneuve, and so on. But when you look at her character in Spider-Man: Homecoming, Far From Home, No Way Home, and then you look at her here, it almost feels like night and day. She feels like a far more serious actress playing a far more serious role. But I think some of that is also due to the fact that, number one, I think she always had these acting chops, but I think it's because of how her character was written in the past. She was written as a high school kid, right? I mean, you know, like going off to college. And so a lot of what you see here is what her character looks like as she has matured. The character of MJ, right? As she's matured, she's in college now, she's taking her life seriously. She realizes there's more to the world world than, high school life. Although I don't really think she ever cared much about high school life in the first place. But the fact is, her character feels far more mature. And a part of me wants to attribute that, to her acting experience over the years since she initially, joined the MCU in the Spider-Man films. But for me, like, she was incredible in this movie. Just mind-blowingly phenomenal in this film, right? And honestly, that takes me into the discussion about the overall feeling of the film, the overall feeling of Spider-Man Brand New Day. The funny thing about this, everyone in the movie gets a kind of equal amount of time, even though it's a Spider-Man film, right? And Tom Holland is the main star, so he gets, his time is equaler than he gets more time, than everybody else. But everybody else kind of gets enough time to, at the very least, understand what's going on with them, to understand their motivations, and for the returning characters to see where they are and, where their headspace is and how they're functioning in the world in this day and age. But what was so crazy about it is it was a Spider-Man film, but it didn't feel like a Spider-Man film. Does that make sense? Anybody who's seen it, does that make sense? There were times I was watching this movie and I forgot I was watching a Spider-Man movie. I forgot I was watching a Spider-Man film. It was that good. I don't say that to take away from the significance of it. Those moments in particular hit when you didn't see Spider-Man on screen, when you were following Sadie Sink's character, or you were following Zendaya, or you were following Ned Leeds, or you were following, especially John Bernthal, right? Mark Ruffalo, as Bruce Banner. I don't really say a whole lot about him because he was that much of a role in the film, right? Just, he had a grand total of maybe like 20 minutes in the entire movie, if that, right? So I mean, he wasn't, it was cool. I think he had just enough to be important to the plot, but not enough that like he overshadowed, right? That being said, the movie it felt like a real, true, serious comic book film, which honestly, I think Marvel needed coming off the heels of Fantastic Four First Steps, because the movie was fun, sure, but I mean, Jesus, had all kinds of problems, Galactus got pushed through a portal using the power of hope. Like, you'd expect Vin Diesel on his ass, right? Just like flying in a Buick Grand National, crashing into Galactus and knocking him through the portal, the power of family, that kind of thing. But with this movie, this is why I say it felt like the natural progression from No Way Home, right? Almost as if like the Spider-Man film landscape has matured, for lack of a better word, right? Like, it feels, okay, you know what it feels like? You know what it really, really feels like? Honestly, and I've heard people saying this, and I'm inclined to agree, this feels like a comic book storyline. And honestly, it feels like the old Stan Lee, Steve Ditko era when Peter Parker was in high school, and then when Peter Parker went to college and went to Empire State University. The story shifts. The feeling of the stories shift entirely. It's a wholly different dynamic because college is a wholly different experience than high school. This feels like that. It feels like in a lot of ways, this kind of perfect blend between a serious drama that you would see coming out of Hollywood and a comic book movie, right? So the best way to describe this, and I might just kind of be beating around the bush, and maybe I'm kind of, beating a dead horse here, but the best way to describe this, not really the serious nature of it, but just the acting portion of Spider-Man No Way Home in the second half of the film, right? Even just like the third act of the film, how serious everybody was and how great they were portraying these roles. Imagine that continued on into this film, but not as dark as as Spider-Man No Way Home, the third act of No Way Home. Hopefully that makes sense. It gives you a much better feeling or a much better understanding. But yeah, this movie was fantastic. It was incredible. Certainly some misses. There were certainly some things about it that I wasn't a big fan of, but honestly, it's way more hits, right? This movie hopefully breaks $1 billion. And honestly, it's a return to form for Marvel Studios, because yes, it was financed by Sony and it was distributed by Sony, but it was made by Marvel Studios, which really leaves me with the question, how the hell did the company that made this also make Fantastic Four? How do you go? It's so ADD, man. I don't really understand it. But that being said, guys, that's my review. No spoilers. I loved it. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.